So what sort of thing are we going to do? How are we going to get it going?
Oh, I'll do my intro bit.
Okay.
This is our Findhorn Barrel podcast, and today I'm in Leona's house, Leona Graham. We're on our episode number 19, I think it is now. So let's start with what's your connection with the community?
Well, I heard about the community in the 70s. I was in Canada. I was actually out on Salt Spring Island. It was a very magical sort of place, and I was creating a garden with friends from all different places in the world. And the chap I was with, we were living in this teepee, and it was very idyllic. And the garden was just growing magnificently, and the deer were trying to eat things, and we were planting things. And he said, we should go to that place called Findhorn. I said, what's that? But when he said the word Findhorn, there was definitely, I guess I'm a mystic. I'm a sensitive in that old-fashioned sense. I said, what is this? What is this place? And then he tried to describe it, but he couldn't because he didn't know much about it. So when I went into Vancouver, I went to this famous bookstore, and I started to look for books. And I got this book. I pulled it out, and somebody's hand came out and tried to take the book away from me. It was about Findhorn. I think it was the one by Thompson. And so that was my first introduction, was out in British Columbia in the idyllic sort of setting. And so that was the garden. It was the garden that drew me. And the fact that it had a sort of mystical, esoteric roots, I discovered that through William Irwin Thompson. I said, well, we'll have to go. So we planned this journey, but he never made it. I met Peter and Eileen, and I got very close to also Joni. I was very close to them, and they welcomed me so
What year was that?
This was 1975. I actually had come with my mother on a kind of on a tour of Scotland. We rented a little car, and I said to my mother, who came many times after, why don't we go off on this journey into this little community? And so we got out, and she didn't actually appreciate that. She was worried it was a Bible camp, because she was worried about all these sort of things. Because I had been, for a period in Canada, a reborn Christian and gone through all these different permutations of... It's one of our toys speaking up there.
Oops.
That's all my conservation work. I've got reader beware. I've got all these different toys that make sound and things. And here's one from one of my cheetah conservation. This is my favorite one here. It's a puppet, a cheetah puppet. It's really cute. And so, yeah, I was led from there to stay on. I mean, I was immediately, people offered me places to stay. There was a lovely lady from Australia, and I tried to leave and went to hitchhike and leave, and nobody would pick me up, and everybody picked everybody up then. I said, well, it's as if they couldn't see me. And so I said, well, I'll obviously have to go back. And I stayed about 10 years, brought my daughter over. I was an academic, a radical activist, left-wing academic in Canada. So I released all that life and worked really closely with the founders.
Was it difficult to leave Canada? Do you have a lot of connections there?
Yes, I do. It was a big Scots-Canadian family. Grahams and Boyds, and they were all came over in the 1840s. And but they kept their Scottish roots and traditions, and even the bagpipes every Sunday. So, and the Highland dancing, which we did. I was born in 1942, right in the middle, so to speak, toward the end of the Second World War. And when I was born, my mother told me later, they didn't know whether we were going to win the war. They didn't know that. It was a total, like they were in the dark. They thought they wouldn't win at that point.
They thought that Germany would take
Yeah,
over
they
Canada.
thought Germany was going to win, and Japan, that they were going to win. Well, my brother Ralph and I were born. He was born in 1944, and I was born in 1942. We called ourselves the war babies. Everything was a battle. And my father was in the services, and all of us joined the service, except my youngest brother. We saw the world through the lens of war. So this is why this time that we're in now is very poignant. And this is because it does feel like it was for them in the late 28, 29, 30, going into 1939. And you see people saying that, the similarities. I did try to make peace in the family. My mother would disappear and she'd let us fight it out, right? But what was good, there were 3 boys and 2 girls. I was very physically fit. I could fight quite late up in time with my brother. I could physically do things that most women couldn't. I could lift things. I could move things. So I think in one way I was raised more democratically than a lot of women in past times. That's the warrior. I was born into a warrior clan in terms of tribe. I didn't think of it that way. I began to see even in those early days, what's the point of this? We're going to destroy one another. And seeing my father and my brother having a fist fight that could have ended in and I said, I'm going for the police. And my father he jumped up and ran after me and pulled the phone out, and I was crossed to the neighbors and this and that. It was very wild. It was you could see the Scottish clan thing right there. I began to think this is not the way to be, And in a way that I learned at the age of, 18, 19, how to meditate. My oldest brother had become a Rosicrucian, and he taught me how to meditate with a candle. And it was very peaceful. I tried to join the Catholic Church and become a nun to get away from the culture of war and all that. And I thought, a convent, that's a place to be, which is what you would done in medieval times, right? It didn't really worry me that the priest didn't want me to join the Catholic Church. I went and joined the Navy instead. I joined a different group.
But that's the exact opposite.
I know, but I know, and I even am married. My first husband was a sailor, but I was going to, maybe I had to join into it to understand it and work myself through it. But always I had this this voice, you see. I avoided so many car crashes on the highway because I did huge amounts of traveling. Once driving with my mother up here, the boy said, there's a car crash up there. And all of a sudden, they just turned the car off to the left. There was this terrible, huge crash on the highway. But it really spooked my mother that I was able to do that. So I did have this voice getting me through everything. I didn't notice any slowing of any traffic or anything. So it was a little ways, but it must have begun. So my higher self warned me. Now, I could have said, oh, don't be silly. Why should I slow down on my journey or do anything? But I had learned one of the things with the higher self is obedience. And Peter and I used to talk about this. If you get this guidance and you don't obey it, you get into trouble because you get conflicted. So you really have to trust your higher self. You have to distinguish that higher self voice. It is the part of you that knows more. And if you don't obey it, well, it goes away. It just dissolves. It goes away and it sits there waiting for you to come back. It's never gone. And if you are in touch with that part of yourself, you have a sense of purpose.
When you were working with Dorothy Peter, Eileen, how did you, in those early days of the community, work with that? What did that look like?
It was definitely sanctuary. Sanctuary was very important. In the early times, you had to, it was par for the course, you had to get up and go to the sanctuary. That's the first thing you would do. Eileen would be in the early sanctuary, 6 o'clock something. She would go with her cat, Susie the cat. I think the cat was called Susie. This white and black cat. And then there would be 8 o'clock. I think it was 8:58, 8 o'clock one. And then you would go back and have a little bit of breakfast. It was in that regard, it was quite regimented. In that regard, it was like a military.
Or more like a monastery.
Monastery and ashram. And you'd go back to your bungalow, and everybody made their own. We didn't have Clooney then. That was before. You'd make your own meal, and you were living generally within quite a few people. There were a few people at the park who were just people living in the caravans, but there was one little caravan where 8 of them were all living. It was in Martha. There's some in.
So
I
did
lived.
people still sleep like sardines in a room or
Well,
something?
no, that sounds very medieval, doesn't it? I've got a head at one end and the feet at
Yeah.
the other. No, everybody had their own bed,
Okay.
except couples. Couples, they always found a way for couples to have a bit more space. But if you were single, you were living. We called them coffin rooms. We weren't supposed to call them coffin rooms, but they were definitely very small rooms, and they had very little area. The first place I ever stayed was in a caravan up at Pine Ridge that Mary Ingalls, it was her room, had been her coffin room. And then she was away, and then she got another caravan. So I was in that room. And then I graduated to a slightly bigger one. You would graduate, and every Saturday you'd look out, and everybody was walking up and down Pine Ridge with their mattresses and this and that, as they would graduate from slightly smaller to slightly larger places.
How did that work? Did you kind of do it? Was it like a bargaining thing? How did you?
We had a personnel department. Yeah, it was like HR, and they kept track of who was in what bungalow, and then they would, if you expressed a desire, if you were happy where you were, you could just stay where you were. But then a lot of people were moving into relationships and out of relationships. So if you were moving into a relationship, then people went out of the way. And early days before I got there, Peter and Eileen really wanted people, if they were in relation, to get married and all that. That had
So
sort of
quite
ended.
traditional people.
But that by the time I got there, it was a little bit more free flowing. There were a lot of but there was definitely a lack of a gay community in those days. I think it was there under the surface, but I remember when finally it began to surface, people like me were very supportive of this, although I played a very heterosexual role in my life. So it was a much more unified entity, because we were like a small tree growing, and we had different wings. And then David Spangler and the Lorians had just left by the time I got here. But the influence of all that was very strong. We had the college, we had internal education, but we also had the Experience Week. And I was part of the team who, when we decided to create external education and give courses and all that. And the first one I gave was with Peter Caddy, creating a New Age community. I mean, we started with the things that we were doing, and then I would do one in relationships and guidance. And we all a lot of us had educational backgrounds.
How did you experience the founders? It's easy for people to create this, mythological image of what Peter was like,
Yes.
or Dorothy was like, because I've never met them. Because I arrived in 2010.
Yeah.
What were they really like as people?
Yeah. Well, there was one point Peter got very ill. It's a fun story, and they had guidance they would live in the park building. So I moved out of their caravan, and they were up there, Peter and Eileen would clean the house daily. It was totally amazing. Clean the stairway. She was always cleaning and cooking. And they were really kind of ordinary people in a way. They were very English to me as a Canadian. They're very English, very British. And and when you had meals with them, which I often did, it was like living in an ordinary race. So they were ordinary folk, but they were extraordinary. They weren't under the surface. As soon as there was something important, then the other aspect of their characters would come forward. And I saw Peter lying on this bed. He looked like he was near death. And he just was like, there's my father. There was an element of that, because at that time I was much younger, and he was the age that my father would be. And I think that, and I told him, and he thought that was fun. But on the other hand, he was also a friend. But he was a lot older than myself. And Eileen was less the mother than the aunt. She was like an aunt. And Joni was she was like an aunt. They were family members. And the older members of the community, like Evelyn and others, they would have you over to tea. Liza and I were talking about this the other, and they would tell you their life stories. And they would tell you things about spaceships. They all, at a certain point, thought we were going to have a great landing of spaceships here and behind Clooney Hill and all this sort of thing. And then that went very quiet. That side of the community done very quiet. Well, I suspect they did land. And maybe some of them came out and they live amongst us. You see, this is my joke, I say to myself. But one day, Joni took me to the beach. She said, wanted to show me where the spaceship landed. You know, I mean, very skeptical about all this sort of thing. But she did take me to a place that I swear you could have seen a big round stage. So, I mean, you lived somewhere between a family and a fantasy, and then it felt like, looking back, we were living a dream. There was a fantasy element too, but the fantasy wasn't negative, it was positive. And it was like, we can do this together, you know. So it was very nourishing. It was exciting too, because you wanted to be here. Those of us from North America, especially from the West, I was coming from the West Coast. I came from the West Coast, so it was and we were bringing a lot of California West Coast sort of energy.
Had you been to California?
Yeah, I had been down there, part of the Haight-Ashbury, the hippie. Yeah, I mean, I was definitely hippie. I was an academic hippie. I mean, I had a foot in both worlds, you know.
Did that include Esalen as well?
I did go to Esalen, but later with Peter Canada, I went to Esalen with Joan Halifax. In fact, we met some of the founders of Esalen, and they based Esalen on spiritual principles as well, even though it was a encounter type, psychological, emotional. When their roots were spiritual, and I remember sitting in a group with them, and I became aware of the depth of Esalen. So I was very pleased when I heard Terry Gilby was coming. So that, to me, was a sister community in the early days, working on the emotional body. That's how I looked at it. Yeah.
And so they were much more pioneering on the emotional exploration
Yes,
side.
Definitely, yeah. And and that had a big influence on us. Peter was not into delving into the emotional body. Now we do a lot more of that. I think it's a healthy thing. You can overdo it. I do remember walking in front of the park, in the community center. Peter was pacing up and down, and he was very disturbed. And in the building, I think there was a primal scream going, a group that was primal scream was one of the new things at that time. And he was very disturbed by it. And so I remember holding his hand and saying, "It's okay. It's okay. We can do this. We can hold this." And I think we went back and had a cup of tea, because that's always what you do. And you did. You always had a cup of tea. Joy created the transformation game. It was called the Game of Life originally. I saw the game grow, so I was one of the early people involved. What Joy was doing really was creating a vehicle that shared what we were going through. That's how I see it. She might put it differently. Yeah. And my first job in the community was, in my orientation, I ended up focalizing the office, because nobody wanted to work in the office, because the person who had been running it was Obasi or something, and she left, and there was nobody. So Peter said, we need somebody. So I ran the office.
There was just one office.
And it was, was the building that's now removed. And in the front, there was one of those telephone interchange things where you plug in, just like in the films, you know. Always, our coffee time was very important. Morning and the afternoon. And I would choose my people to go and have. So rather than have it in the office, I would go over to the gardening group, or I would go up to the construction. But then I really wanted, to work on the hall. And Lyle was, he was focalizing the hall, the building of the hall. And I thought, I really want to join. I got my boots. I'm ready, to do hard labor, because I'm really quite a strong female. So I think I was the first woman to do the physical work. There were women behind there. Eventually, like Frances was working with George in regards to, and there were two other architects, but in actually physically working with the guys, I was working with them. And at that point, there was no roof in the hall. They had put some of the beams, and well, we were putting up the beams. And there was an extraordinary thing that happened. I saw the beam falling down because it was quite something. We're doing all this without hard
Because
hazard.
big beams, the
Yeah, the
universal
big
heart,
beams.
big wooden beams.
Yeah, we were putting those up. And I saw the beam coming, and George, I think his name is Caitlin, I saw it going to go right down on his leg. And I did this thing. I mean, it came from my heart. So I said, I imagine light going there. And it bounced. It's like it bounced off. It was the most extraordinary thing. It was a flash of light and it bounced off. And we also just went like that and just carried on. But I remember thinking, did that really happen? I'll never know, right? But it seemed none of us got hurt. None of us had beams falling and breaking our heads or anything. But we would sleep in our sleeping bags when it was nice weather, just on the floor. And you could look up and the stars coming through. And then we had to put the roof on. So I was doing that at the same time as I was doing the office, too. I mean, we seemed to work all the time. But at night, we did all these wonderful things together. We always were doing, nobody sat, there was there was one television in a little office outside the CC. But if you don't have a television and you don't have all this, you spend time together. And in a way, I do see that going on up there now. I see people spending time. And one I like still is, even though with all our smartphones and all that, we still are quite good about putting our smartphones away here.
When I look around or look at some of the old pictures and writings and the buildings of the community from that period in the 70s, I do sometimes almost feel like everyone was on drugs or something. There's a kind of utopian feel, like everyone's working 24/7, and there's like this. Yeah, it feels almost like they're on drugs.
People, I think, because we spent so much intense time together, we were all kind of in love with one. I mean, I can tell you there was a lot of sexual energy going down here. I mean, it was mainly heterosexual, but it could have been other things. But because that was the era. Because that energy, that creative energy, that sexual energy, that spiritual, it was very, you all wanted to be with each other. You didn't hide away in your room, and it wasn't that kind of ashram, And we had the same, when we did want that time, just to be with God, or however we express it, you had the sanctuary, you could go. And you had the sea. You had the which we still do. You could go down to the beach. You could go out to the bay. And we had fights. And I remember I had 2 guys fighting over me. I mean, fist fight. We had to get people to pull them out, including the bar, to stop the fight, going on. Because I left one guy was with another guy, right? There was an intensity, yeah. However, we were living it, so we didn't think of it that way. I see some of that intensity now and then here. When I hear about an event, or I read, or I watch a Zoom, or I can see that love affair is still that core, that we want to be each other. The fact that you and I are sitting doing this, you from that newer generation, me from that shows that love is still there. And it's modified, but it's still there. So but it was really the feeling of family. And sometimes people would come who weren't meant to be here. And I still see that. I still see people come. They want to be part of the game, but they're not yet part of the family. And then they go away, and then something happens. Sometimes they come back, and then they join. You're very much, Alex, a part of the family. I can see in the way you are that you hold those foundation values as well as the community values. And I am sad that we went through all that and the redundancies, and it would have been better if we had just been able to carry on with the foundation. But at the same time, we have to let go. But even as we speak, big changes are happening. Humanity needs to go to a different level. And what we're doing here in this community is trying to find a way to do that, to maybe become a peaceful species and stop fighting and killing each other, and how to look after each other. This is what we're also doing here, and how to communicate with each other, and how to look after our children, our children's children, 7 generations. I think that's what we're trying to find ways to do. And right now it's a bit chaotic because of the changes with the foundation. And the emotional element gets quite heated in our meetings sometimes. But I think the light is still there, and maybe we just have to be stronger in our commitment to it.
I do feel that the culture, at least, I don't know, Western culture have adopted a lot of the, what I saw in the community sort of 15 years ago has moved into the mainstream, at least sometimes superficially. People feel they have to project at least a certain eco-conscious image, and people are more aware of their emotions and so on than they used to be.
Yeah. And that was one of the concerns with our educational development here, what it is that we need to teach, because maybe it's been learned already. So maybe we need to go to a different level. Let's not be teaching or offering courses on the same old things. Oh, but on the other hand, maybe we need the same old things. Who knows? Maybe we need to refine these things. And the Education Circle for me is one of the neatest bodies. It's grassroots. There's 60 of us. There's a working group. There's a leading group. I think that may be a clue to where the next steps for us are. It is in the mainstream more, so it should be easier for us to take the next step to teach whatever that is. And maybe we have to learn a whole bunch of new things that we didn't know. About a year ago, I said, there's a feeling here now like it was in the 70s. It was like regeneration, a lot of creativity. I mean, some people may come. A chap said yesterday it seemed very unengaged. There was not much happening over there. I said, well, you obviously didn't come at the right moment, because there's a lot happening over there. If you come at the right moment, you'll see lots of children running around. And then you'll see no children because they're off at school, obviously, or they're at bed or something. But if you go up to the cafe at any particular time, you'll see how much creativity. And there are different generations. Yes, we need young people, but young people are finding us because I get to talk to them. And also, I meet a lot of these young people here in Forest, younger people like yourself. I think then you were in a foundational time. But we didn't think of it that way. We were just doing. We had less concern about money and houses. We were all living in very confined quarters and primitive sort of, and very unecological caravans. Now we have more ecological housing. It seemed then like we were really truly a family. And I get that feeling again here. And the deeper values, sometimes they get lost in the trivia of trying to figure out what to do next, like what we're going through now. Should we merge the NFA with the eco-village Findhorn? Those are all bits of the puzzle. But there's a bigger picture here, that was always there in our roots. And I'm very close to that energy still. I'm really glad that you're here, Alex, in this community. I mean, we haven't got to know each other personally as friends yet in that way, but I really think, good, Alex is still here. You're still here. But I feel my voice going, so, yeah.
We have been talking for quite a long time. So. Yeah. Thank you for making the time to talk today.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll talk in another episode about other things.
Yeah.